بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. Continuing on with our conversation about migration. We've reached enough from the classical and now we're speaking about the modern. Reached Ayatollah Sayyid Sistani. Now, in his book, A Code of Practice for Muslims in the West, is a very important book for those who are living in the West. It has some simplified issues that we all experience when living in the West that will help make our life easier to live in the West. However, there is also a detailed commentary on the issue of migration itself. Why did we even end up in the West? And as I've said before, there are multiple reasons why we might have been why we might have ended up being in the West, whether it was by our choice because we needed a better economic life or a safer life or whatever the case might be, or because we found ourselves in the West. We might have been born there. We might have even been of those people. So for example, I might be British or Australian or American, but I have converted or reverted to becoming a Muslim. I'm still living there amongst non-Muslims. And so there's quite a significant commentary there and a few questions and answers that I'd encourage you to read. I'm going to cover just some of those issues, and it is available in English. Some of the issues that he discusses in there are the conscious and subconscious absorptions of laws. So when someone is Muslim and they are living in a Western society or in a society that is not Islamically based, they are going to absorb the laws of that society. They're going to absorb the akhlaq and the morale and the etiquettes of that society, whether they like it or not, whether it's conscious or subconscious, it's going to happen. And this is a slow process that takes time to develop, years to develop, and it sort of progresses through, and the color of our faith changes with time, from being a very solid faith through to a lighter shade of faith, and then that lighter shade of faith actually goes on to our next generation. The lighter shade of faith goes on to our next generation. And that next generation will carry that lighter shade of faith and make it even lighter. And so generation after generation, even the best of us might have this issue. And when we're talking about fallacies, inshallah, we will talk about people who are doing very well in the West and are used as examples that it's possible to live in a non-Islamic society and be a very taqwa person, right? A very God-conscious person. Yes, that's true. That's true. And we'll talk about that, inshallah, when we're talking about fallacies. He talks about non-Islamic values versus Islamic values and Islamic societies. And then he talks about the un-Islamic influence is seen more in the second generation, just like I described, where the shade of faith progressively becomes lighter as we progress through time, and then as we progress through generations as well. And he talks about at-ta'arrub ba'd al-hijra, and he says, and I quote, practically, it means leaving an environment where you could follow Islam and moving to a place where you may be prone to not following Islam. So he's left it open. It's not necessarily meaning that you have to, leave America and move to Iraq or Iran or Lebanon or wherever it is that you may choose to be the best place for you. It doesn't necessarily mean moving from the West to East. It does mean, however, leaving an environment where you could follow Islam. This is a ta'arrub, sorry, I got that the other way around. A ta'arrub is when you're leaving, for example, Iraq or Iran or Lebanon to go to America, right? Al-Hijra is from the West to East. Anyway, a ta'arrub is when you're leaving an environment where you could practice Islam freely to an environment where it is more difficult to do so. And in fact, it could whitewash your faith and religion, where you are more prone to not following Islam. Now he mentions some narrations in this book which considers at-ta'arrub as major sins, and we've discussed some of those narrations. He mentions 4 narrations in there, and he says that the implication is that there is no excuse, right? The rewards for going or traveling to non-Islamic countries, he mentions those. He mentions that it is forbidden to travel to non-Islamic countries. He mentions the role of the wife. He mentions the role of the mature or baligh children, and he mentions the issue of choice. And then he mentions the issue of the obligation to return. Now, I'm gonna just go through some of those very quickly, and I'll highlight where I'm at. So the issue of major sin, we've discussed the narrations, and he, for example, mentions Al-Kafi and some other books. We've done the narration, so I won't go through that. He talks about rewards for traveling to non-Islamic countries. So what does that mean? Because that's the opposite of what we're saying, and the opposite of what we're talking about. Why we're talking about at-ta'arrub ba'd al-hijra, which means that we should not go to a non-Islamic environment. But then he talks about the reward of doing so. And this narration, which is by Hamad al-Sindi, he says, that he visits cities where there's polytheism, right? Polytheists, kuffar. He asked Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, I visit these cities, and some amongst us say that if you die over there, you're going to die with them. You're going to rise up with them. And this is what the Imam says. Oh, Hamad, when you are over there, do you talk about our affair, our truth, and call people to it? Do you propagate our faith, our religion, our Ahlul Bayt? And he says, yes. And then he said, when you are in these cities of Islam, do you talk about our affair and propagate? He goes, no. So the Imam says this: if you die over there in the land of the kuffar, of the non-Muslims, you will be raised as an ummah by yourself. Even like if there's no one around you that has become Muslim, you will be raised as an ummah by yourself, and there will be light in front of you. This is in Wasa'il al-Shia, volume 16, page 188. What does that mean? That means this reward for going or traveling to non-Islamic countries, there has to be a purpose behind it. The purpose is your intention needs to be qurbatan ila Allah ta'ala, right? When does that intention come in? Everything goes into place. When that intention is correct, everything falls into place. Hamad, what was he doing when he was going there? He was propagating Islam. He wasn't going there for trading or, for example, for pleasure or for, I don't know, what else would you go for? Tourism or family, visiting family, whatever it may be. His intention was to go at least propagate the truth of Ahlul Bayt, the truth about Islam. He might be doing other things on the side, but as per the narration, he goes there and he propagates. That's important. So the recommendation is, if you're going to go, you need to go for the purpose of spreading Islam. And that's the question. How is the West going to see Islam and get to know about Islam if there are no Muslims? Well, if you're one of those people who are going to propagate Islam, fine. Go there and stay there. But remember, the condition is what? That you need to be able to defend or protect yourself and your family as well. So these are the 2 conditions. The rewards for going or traveling to non-Islamic countries has these conditions. This narration that we read tells us that we need to go to propagate Islam. Okay, you're going to go and trade. Okay, that's fine. You're going to go to study. That's fine. You're going to go to visit family. That's fine too. But propagate, spread the news, even if it's just amongst your families, even if it's just that, but go with that purpose. And the second thing, قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ, protect yourselves and your family. These are the 2 conditions. And then he says forbidden to travel to non-Islamic countries, which is completely the opposite of the one that we just did. So here's 1, here's 2, here's 3. Number 3 is completely opposite to number 2. First one says rewards for traveling to non-Islamic countries, and then it says forbidden to travel to non-Islamic countries. Well, if you don't have those two conditions at the very start, that condition of propagating and calling people to come to Islam, and the condition of being able to protect yourself and your family and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren, right? If you're going to stay there for forever, then you need to look after their faith as well. Then it becomes forbidden if these conditions are not met. It is forbidden because if for whatever reason it causes the loss of your religion in any way, then it's forbidden. The role of the wife, and this is really interesting, really highly encourage you that you should go and read these. Eventually, inshallah, if you're not already married, you will be married. And you may become a father, inshallah, or a mother, inshallah. And then there's a decision to travel. To travel where? To travel to a place where you cannot practice your religion, or at least you're afraid that where you're going, the faith of your children might be weakened, or your own faith will be weakened. What happens there? I'm the wife. My husband is going to go to a place where I cannot pray 5 times a day, where I cannot fast, where I cannot wear hijab. And there are places like this, right? Hijab is mamnu if you want to go to university. It's forbidden if you want to go and study, or if you want to go and work, for example. Here's what he says. If the wife strongly feels or is sure that her traveling with her husband to a non-Muslim country will result in the loss of faith, it is haram. It's not my words. It is haram for her to travel with him. Look, this ita'ah has limits. This, the husband says you must not leave your house. Okay, fine, chash. The husband has said to the wife, you cannot leave the house. No questions, you cannot leave the house. Okay. The husband says, you have to come with me because I'm going to this non-Islamic country. The wife here says if she strongly feels there's a problem and that this journey or being there is going to cause a problem for her faith, she can refuse here. What about the mature children? Mature children or baligh children? These are children who have reached the age of puberty and they can make their own decisions now. Brothers and sisters, if you have children, when you have children, the children around you, your cousins and your nieces and nephews, when they become of age, they start to be able to make decisions on their own. Earlier on, they've seen the good and the bad. They can distinguish between good and bad. That's before they reach puberty. After that, they can start making their own decisions. Sure, in the society that we're living in, up until they're 16 or 18, depending on the country you're living in, they cannot make their own decisions, and the father and the mother have to agree upon that, except for the issue of vaccination, which nowadays the WHO is saying that they don't need the permission of the parents. Long story, is not right. Anyway, the issue is this, that once they can make their own decisions, then they have a responsibility. And he says this, if the baligh boys or girls strongly feel that their journey to the non-Islamic country with their father or mother or friends, you're going on a holiday, you're going to France for a trip, you're going to Italy for a trip, will cause loss of faith, it is haram for them to travel with those people, whether it's your parents or your friends. What about this issue of no choice? This issue here, no choice. What does that mean? Sometimes you fall in a circumstance in which you have no choice. Now, this is truly, if you go back to Surah An-Nisa, ayahs 97 to 100, there are truly situations where you can consider yourself to be mustalaf, to be of the base, to be someone who has been forced to not be able to migrate or be in a position that you don't want to be in. So if circumstances forces a Muslim to migrate to a non-Muslim country, so for example, a tyrant, Saddam Hussein, for example, in Iraq, he was a tyrant, he was going after the Shias, he was going to kill them. There was two choices, either fight back or migrate or die. Or fighting back will involve death as well, martyrdom. With the knowledge that the migration will cause loss of faith. So you're migrating with that knowledge, right? It is permissible for him to make that journey to save your life to the extent, here's the important part, to the extent, pay attention to this, please. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. If circumstances forces a Muslim to migrate to a non-Muslim country with the knowledge that the migration will cause loss of faith, you're going to go somewhere and you know that your religion is going to be more difficult. I might lose my faith. My wife might lose her faith. My husband might lose his faith. Our children, our brothers, our sisters, right? It is permissible. You're allowed to do that because you're going to save your life. For him to make that journey to the extent that it saves his life or her life, and not more than that. This brings us to the question, okay, I'm here in the UK because my parents needed to migrate away from Afghanistan or from Pakistan because they were being threatened with death. We had to leave to save our life. Our parents did that, huh? I had to leave because Saddam Hussein was there. My parents had to leave because Saddam Hussein was there and they were persecuted people. They were about to be killed. So they had to leave. If they were to return to Iraq, for example, they would be stopped at the airport and shot dead. Now the cause has lifted. Here's the issue. To the extent that it saves his life. What if that extent disappears or is lifted? What is the cause and the excuse is no longer there? What's my obligation now? And this is why we said earlier that migration is fluid. Just because you migrated once doesn't mean that's the end of the story. I migrated once to a non-Islamic country because I needed to do that to save my soul, to save myself, to save my children. Okay, that excuse has now lifted. What's my excuse now? Okay, there is no excuse. What do? Do I have a choice? Or am I still in the no choice bag? We have to think about that. The next point is obligation to return. Okay, we've migrated because we had no choice, but now there's an obligation to return. If an immigrant, he says, if an immigrant Muslim residing in a non-Muslim country knows that in his staying in that country will lead to loss of faith or of that of his children, it is wajib. It is wajib on him to return to one of the Muslim countries. So see how we broke, Sayyid Al-Sistani has broken this down. First, it's a major sin to do ta'arrub. Then there is a reward to going to non-Islamic countries with conditions. It is forbidden to travel to non-Islamic countries with the loss of these conditions. The wife has a role. The children have a role. You might not have a choice, so you have to migrate, but you also have an obligation to return if that choice is given back to you, if the reason for your, if the excuse has been lifted. And if residing there in a non-Muslim country means that you're going to lose your faith, it becomes wajib, brothers and sisters, to migrate. We've spoken about loss of faith a few times. What is loss of faith? And this is what he means. He says, it means either committing a forbidden act by indulging in minor or major sins like drinking intoxicants, adultery, eating forbidden meat, drinking najis or impure drinks, etc. Right? Anything that is committing a forbidden act is loss of faith. It also means abandoning the fulfillment of a compulsory act like neglecting salah, fasting, hajj, and other obligations, right? So if you're going to neglect your obligations, that's clear. That's very clear. If you're not going to pray in the country in which you're in because it's too hard, because there's haraj, because there's all these excuses that you can find for yourself, there's a problem. If you do haram, that's a problem. If you commit minor or major sins, that's a problem. It doesn't matter what kind of sin. Are you in a country that you are being attacked psychologically, left, right, and center to commit sins or not? Are you affected by those or not? Remember, even a solid rock will hollow out if a constant the constant dripping of water for years will hollow out the solid rock, but you won't notice it. It will be over time. It's very important to think about these things. I'm going to share a few questions and answers here. I've selected those from the websites and from the book, so you can actually go and read it and decide for yourselves which one applies to you, which ones are important to you. I've just selected a few here. Sometimes a Muslim residing in Europe and America and some countries indulge in haram activities that you would not have done otherwise, right? You know, when you're driving down the road and you see all these advertisements, and I think, you know, I can relate to this because I've seen these advertisements, right? You're trying your best, and then you've turned off the internet, you've turned off the TV, and then you go to work. You go to work and there's advertisements everywhere. There are, you know, things to see everywhere, and it's like, oh, like there's no escape. Okay. He would not have done if he had remained in a Muslim country. The manifestations of temptation in non-Muslim societies may attract a Muslim to committing haram deeds, even if he is not inclined towards them, right? So you may not want to do them, but they just drag you into it. Does this come under the banner of loss of faith that makes it haram for him to stay in that country? And the answer is yes, it does. Unless the sins he sometimes indulges in, and without insisting upon them, they are of the minor category. Okay, so yes, they are sins which require him or her to migrate. Now, he has an unless here, and I'm gonna be, you know, as fair as I can with this. Unless the sins he sometimes indulges in, and without insisting upon them, they are of the minor sins. Remember the previous slide said even the minor sins, right? So I think what he means here is that this, yes, they are of the minor category. So the minor category also might cause you the need to migrate, or it could be read in a different way, where he says, yes, right, they are of the category that you need to migrate, unless, right, unless the sins he sometimes indulges in, and without insisting upon them, these are considered a minor category. So this becomes one sin. And in this case, you don't need to migrate. I don't know. That's up to you to decide how you want to read that. But certainly, if it's a sin where you become insistent on committing them, not because you want to, it's just because it's the way that it is, right? You're there and you're constantly being targeted psychologically with material that you have no choice but to see. You're driving a car. You can't close your eyes and drive a car. You're in a metro, in the train. You can't, you know, you look up, there's ads. You look down, there's ajib. What do you look at? You look ahead, something else, subhanAllah. Question, if an immigrant fears the loss of faith for his children, now we're talking about the next generation, is it haram for him to stay in that non-Muslim country? Look at the answer, yes, it is. The same rule applies to himself only, brings it back to himself. Here he's talking about fears the loss of faith for his children, brothers and sisters. And it's, and you know, this was written years ago. And now, in this society that we're living in, there's an argument that says that it's nearly impossible, if not impossible, nearly impossible to send your children to school in the United Kingdom, in America, in Canada, wherever, in New Zealand, Australia, wherever it may be that's considered the West, right? And the West isn't just geographical. There's Western problems in Islamic countries. It's not like you're going to come to an Islamic country and all your problems are going to be resolved. No, there are other kinds of problems, including some of which are the same as you'll find in the West. But the argument goes that it's impossible or nor impossible to be sending your children to the West without having a fear for their loss of faith. And if you don't have that fear, then I don't know where you're living. Hold on. Question. Is it permissible? I'm just talking about fear. just the fear, not necessarily that there is a problem with the tarbiyah, no, just the fear of it. Is it permissible for a person to reside in non-Muslim countries with all its temptation that confronts the person on the streets, the school, the television, the media, while he has, look at this, while he has the ability to migrate to a Muslim country? Although that transfer would cause difficulty in residence, for example. You can't get an iqama, you can't get a visa all the time, it's difficult, you have to run around. Loss of material wealth and comfort. You don't have a big house anymore, you don't have 2 cars anymore, you don't have a big bank account anymore, for example. You don't have that comfortable sofa. What they have in, for example, Iraq isn't the same as what they have in America, or whatever. They don't have, I don't know, whatever brand that is available over there that's not available in a Muslim country, whatever. And constrain the worldly aspect of his life becomes more difficult. If it is not permissible to remain in such a country, otherwise if he has to migrate, would his efforts in propagating among the Muslims, in other words, reminding them of their obligations and encouraging them to refrain from haram, change the rule for him and allow him to remain in that country? So we have 2 scenarios in that question. I'm a Muslim, I live in a non-Muslim country, and there are lots of temptations in that country. I'm getting tempted left, right, and center. I go to a movie, there's temptations. I watch the news, there's temptations. I go to work, there's temptations. But if I go to a Muslim country, I'm going to find it very difficult, right? It's going to be very difficult. I might lose my job. I won't have my car. I won't live in a double-story house with a swimming pool in it and a tennis court at the back. I don't know which school to send. I have to, my children, I have to go to Iqan to get my visa renewed every year. It's very difficult. I'm not sure about that. Okay. If it's possible, if I'm allowed to stay, would my efforts in propagating among Muslims be able to change that rule? If it is not permissible to stay? The answer, look, it is not haram, okay? Here's what we said at the very first session, I believe it was. The issue of living in a non-Islamic country in itself is not haram. Traveling there in itself is not haram. Moving there in itself is not haram. It's not haram to stay in that country. So you're not doing anything haram. I'm not doing anything haram if I live in Australia or Canada or America. Condition, if it does not create hurdles for him and his family in fulfilling their religious obligations, hijab, salah, fasting, etc. Presently, as well as in the future, that fear for your child, right? That is the future, that fear for yourself, that fear for your child, that fear for your grandchild, and your generations there. That decision that you're making right now, while you're able to migrate and don't, is on your neck. Whether it is you or your children or your children's children, all of the generations thereafter will be hanging on your neck because you were able to. Okay? Otherwise, it would not be permissible, even if he kind of propagation activities. In other words, brothers and sisters, even the sheikh, even the propagator who wants to go to the West to propagate, if he is going to lose his religion, he can't go there. And Allah knows best. My time is up. 1 minute over, in fact, so I apologize about that. I'm going to open the floor to questions. If you have any questions, please type them out or voice them across. I don't mind either way, but I am at your service.
Asalaam alaykum, Sayyid.
Wa alaykum assalam wa rahmatullah.
I have a quick question. So, you know the way you were saying about the story about I forgot his name. Is it Hama or
Hamad Sindhi, yes.
Hamad? Yes. He went to propagate about Islam and spread Islam in that polytheistic city. What if you do so, but you know there's an ayah Quraniya that says وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. So at the same time, you can't really always, argue or debate with atheists or polytheists, because in the Quran it says, you have to ignore them at the end of the day. I think there was a story about Imam Ali as well, but I won't spend too much time explaining it. So what do you do then?
Okay, so Hamad al-Sindi may not necessarily have gone there with the one and only intention of spreading and propagating, right? So he may have gone there for trading or for whatever reason, but he went there regularly and he feared dying there. So what he was doing there is one thing, and then propagating is another thing. Now you might say, look, I'm studying here, my family's here, etc., etc. What's my role? My role is to propagate Islam. Okay, but there's a contradiction here, right? Because if I propagate to these guys, they're just going to reject me. And if they reject me, I just have to say salam. Is that the question? What's my role now?
That's exactly it, yes.
Okay. This is assuming that you can protect your religion, correct?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So assuming you can protect your religion on that condition. Now, the methodology of propagating are different depending on different people. Sometimes propagating is just with your akhlaq, with the way that you talk, with your way that you walk. Just standing up to pray could be propagating because people are going to ask you questions. That's all propagation. It doesn't necessarily have to mean argument all the times, like you need to believe in God, you need to do this. No, it doesn't necessarily have to mean that. However, there are different levels of propagation, and we need to be aware of those levels and where we need to apply each of these levels to different people at different times. Okay, so when someone continues to argue with you and rejects what you're saying, you would say "Qulu salama" and you leave him, right? That's fine, but that doesn't mean that you stop your obligation altogether because you failed once or twice or 3 times or 4 times, right? It's an ongoing thing.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, we'll end with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Thank you everyone for joining in.